Why don't you go ahead and tell us how you became acquainted with the Drennans?
We first moved into Woodbury Village in 1952. I was in my first year of high school. And we had a survey for school about who was going to vote that year. It was an election year. And I went into the Drennans on that survey, stopped at their house. I was going around various places in the village. And I remember that the Myers were there that night, and somehow the subject of music came up. And they found out I played the piano a little, and they wanted me to come back and play for them, which I did. And so over the next, probably 3 or 4 years, I used to go in sometimes 2 or 3 times a week in the evenings and talk with them and play for them.
Um, can you tell us about where she painted and
Well, of course, I never saw her actually at work very much. She was usually, it was in the evening when I'd go in. But I have seen her, she had an easel that sat in a window in the living room near the kitchen wall. And she, very often, she'd have a partly finished picture there. And I think I have seen her there, and I assume that was where she did at least some of her painting.
now can you tell us how you acquired your picture of the Gospel Hall?
I attended the Gospel Hall at that time, and Bessie went to church with me one Sunday evening. And sometime after, I can't remember how long, she presented me with that picture, which was supposed to represent me going to church.
Can you think of can you tell us a little bit about them serving in the legislature?
I never knew a lot about that, except that Blind Shutley, I think, was the oldest legislature. I can't remember whether it was in the state of Vermont, certainly, or the United States, but she was serving in legislature when she was 80 years old. She was the oldest sister. And then the younger sister served for a while, but she wasn't as old when she served. They had an older sister that was also in legislature, but that was before my time. I don't remember her. They were staunchly Republican. I know that. I remember I was at home one summer from Boston in the the year Kennedy was running for president. And of course, 1960, and everyone was quite excited about it. And Frances Darling, the youngest sister, said, "David, I want you to take the Freeman's Oath, vote a straight Republican ticket, and I will suggest whom you can vote for."
Had you heard the story about her tying herself to the tree so that they wouldn't be cut?
No, that was nothing that I was familiar with. I read that in the book, and that was the first I ever heard of that. She was capable of it, I'll say that.
Um, Did were you do you know anything about any of the other paintings that she painted?
I don't know a great deal about the backgrounds of them and like that. I know I've seen her, I'm sure, painting some of them, because I went there over a period of years, and she was nearly always had a picture on her easel, a painting on her easel that she was working on.
Was Bessie was she musical too?
She played some by ear. She played a little by ear on the piano, and she could play the harmonica.
Oh wow! Now, did all the family get together like when you came over to play the piano? Was it like a get together where you all got together and played?
Well, the family were all there. Well, they were only the three sisters.
Yeah.
They did have a brother, but he was, I guess I remember seeing him there once or twice. But he would, they would, many times we didn't always have music, we just talked. I learned a lot of incidents about older people in town, people that were gone, you know, before I ever knew them, that they told me. And sometimes I would play, and sometimes the older sister played some, and sometimes she would play.
Do you remember anything about like the dance hall? Was it a dance hall when you knew them?
No, I don't. Of course, it was their father who ran that for a hotel.
Yeah.
And when I remember them, it was an antique shop. And I can remember helping Bessie carrying, not Bessie, but Frances, the younger sister, ran it. And I can remember her asking me to carry things for her, and I had one of these old three-dimensional stereoscopes, and she'd give me a stereopticon view.
Can you think of anything?
Where did you play the piano with them? Like, where was it in?
It was in their living room.
In their home. It wasn't in the hotel part. It was
No,
the
there
one
was
house
no hotel part.
at
When I went there, what had probably been the main rooms in the hotel, I don't know what they had there, but their living room was a large, huge room that had probably been wherever people congregated in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a kitchen and another room on, you know, various bedrooms. It was a huge house. I don't remember. Yes, I went upstairs because that was the way we went into the dance hall. I've been in the hall up there, but I don't think I ever was through the whole house. The place at the bottom, under the dance hall, they used for storage.
Do you remember hearing anything about Happy Landing? I know that seemed to be like a popular spot for her to go. Was up.
Oh
to the
yes,
Happy
and there was a
Landing.
reason for that. Frances Brennan married a man, John Darling, and they, I believe, bought that farm and lived there, and that was why Bessie was so attached to it. She used to go there when they lived there, when Frances and her husband lived there. And I'm not sure whether they called it Happy Landing or whether Bessie called it that.
That's interesting. I didn't know that at all.
About the Happy Landing.
Yeah. Were there and in the living room where everyone congregated, were there a lot of her art, like her paintings and stuff around there, or her paintings were only like?
I don't ever remember seeing any of her paintings on the walls. I don't think, the book tells that it took her sisters some time to realize that Bessie could paint. They were rather repressive with Bessie, but there were reasons they had to be sometimes. Bessie was unusual. I've told in the book that I can remember there were some neighbors that were not exactly top drawer, and Frances liked to be top drawer. And I remember Bessie saying that their little boy, she said, he's a smart little boy. And Frances said, how do you know, Bessie? Bessie said, well, for all you know, I may have had him up on the porch and talked to him when you obliged were to God. And Frances said, oh, Bessie, you didn't.
Can you tell us about the junkets? Is that the correct word for that?
They probably had dances in that hall. I think they did at one time. But our kitchen junket was, actually, I don't know if they had them or not, a kitchen junket was a gathering of neighbors. Neighbors would congregate in some house and maybe sing and chat and have refreshments, and if they had room they might dance. So whoever played instruments would bring them. And that was a kitchen junket.
You didn't know that either.
No. I knew the word, but I didn't know what it was. Oh, I'm trying to think if there's anything.
Did he ever hear him play?
Did you ever hear Sprague Bailey's music? Did you ever listen?
Oh, yes, I played with him for an entertainment
Oh, I didn't know. Tell us about
when
that.
I was in school. Well, it was nothing. It was just an entertainment. He played guitar, I played melody, and I played the piano.
Wow.
Yes, I've heard Sprague play.
Does he know this person?
Ephraim Sauls.
I knew him, but not very well. I knew him. I remember him and his wife coming to Grange meetings years ago. She was a Tibbetts, and they lived in that house. You know where you can go from South Woodbury up through to Nelson Pond?
Where the
And-
Pritchett's live.
And where that barn is right over the road, built right over the road, that was where they lived. I have a card that Satara Sabin from Woodbury Lake sent to Mrs. Saul's mother back in the 1920s somewhere.
I'm glad we can edit this because I'm just trying to think of what else you told me when I was at your mom's that was just so fascinating.
You were quite interested in Sprague Bailey being descended from the first white man in Woodbury.
Yeah.
Sprague is, let me think, great-great-grandson of the first white man who settled in Woodbury. I knew Sprague's mother, and she told me all about it.
Could you tell me? This isn't about Bessie, but could you tell me again about the first like settlement in Woodbury?
The first settlement in Woodbury, the first white man to settle in Woodbury was Gideon Sabin, and he settled up beyond, just beyond Happy Landing, where that little cemetery is. You know, there's a big house in back of it. And the log cabin was over somewhere in back of that, the first log cabin in town. And Mrs. Bailey told me that the first white child born in Woodbury was Polly Sabin. She married Lambert Sprague, who was Sprague Bailey's great-grandfather. Lambert's son was Cyrus, and Mrs. Bailey was his daughter, Lillian.
Does he have a boyfriend?
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody court Bessie?
I have heard, I don't know, I have heard various stories, and you can't always, you know, you don't all know how much of it is true and how much of it is hearsay. I've heard that she was disappointed in love, that someone, you know, jilted her, and that was why she was so odd. But I don't know if that's true or not.
What the impression that I get from like talking to everybody is like Bessie's sisters were like the wicked stepsisters, and that Bessie was like, well, she wasn't really like Cinderella, but she was always the one that was the one that did all the work and things like that. Do you recall that was the way that it was? That
I don't think that was always absolutely true. I was there, I saw them. I think the work was at least somewhat shared. Sometimes Bessie came back before the others did from Montpelier and opened the house, things like that. But I think that the work was to some extent shared, and sometimes they hired someone to come in and help with it.
Did Bessie like work outside of the house too? Did she like have a job anywhere else?
Never that I knew of, but of course I couldn't say whether she ever did or not, because she was quite elderly when I first knew her. She must have been well into her 70s. So I don't know that I would doubt it. I've heard someone told me that after her father and mother died, she wouldn't leave the house in the winter with the others. She had to stay home and keep fires for father and mother. So it doesn't sound like she ever had a job.
Were when they served in legislature and would go to Montpelier and stuff, were Bessie's parents, they were already gone by
Yes,
then?
yes,
Yeah.
they were gone long before I ever knew anything about them.
What did she look like? Because there's only 2 photographs of her.
The picture in the book there, either one of them is a fairly good likeness of her as I remember her. That is Bressie Brennan,
Okay.
as I remember her. She looked very much like that. And there's another one here somewhere in the front, and that was a good, yeah, that's a good likeness too.
Do you ever remember like seeing her around town painting pictures of different houses?
No, I think she painted from her mind. I don't think she as you notice, her pictures aren't copies. She was more, I don't know, I'm not versed in art, but I think she was possibly more of what they would call an impressionistic painter. She was a folk painter, and she painted from what she remembered and what she saw. I don't think she went out and copied houses or anything.
When she, in some of her paintings, like the poppies, there's little babies in the petals. Do you know?
No,
Where
the
that came from.
poppies was an early picture, wasn't it? It was long before my time. I don't know what went on in her mind when she painted. You read in the book, and have, I'm sure, that she got Rin Tin Tin into a number of pictures, that famous dog that people didn't want him in.
Do you remember hearing anything about like women going in and working for the Drennans and then getting paid with paintings?
No. No. By the time I knew them, you see, Bessie's paintings had become somewhat commercialized. I mean, they had caught on. The Myers had noticed them, people from the Adamant Music Colony had noticed them, and people were buying them. So they wouldn't have been very apt to be paying people.
Can you tell us, did you know about Alfred Hitchcock acquiring one of her paintings? Could you tell us a little bit about that, if you know about that?
I don't know any more than is in the book. I think that was in '56. And by '56 I had moved to Connecticut. But I did know, I suppose I knew at the time, someone probably told me that it happened.
Yeah.
But I don't know much about it.
Vera told me that.
She was in town, so she would probably know more about it than I would.
Yeah. And the president, them sending one to the president, do you remember any of that, or were you around when that happened?
Did she paint a picture of what and send to him?
It was the Easter egg hunt on the White House
Yes,
lawn.
I have. Now, I don't know that I ever saw it, but I do have some, now that you mention it, I do have some recollection of her painting that and sending it to, I would say it was in the Eisenhower administration. I doubt if they would have sent one to Kennedy. Matter of fact, Kennedy, I remember Frances, the younger sister, grabbing the paper and throwing it on the floor. Kennedy's picture was on the front page and saying, "Must I see that face leering at me every time I pick up a newspaper?"
Oh my god. Oh, that's so funny. They're such characters.
They
I love
were.
it.
I'm trying to.
Probably you'd better edit this well
Yeah.
before you release it.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in here though that you said.
There's some of these things that I wouldn't say if there was anyone, but there's no one alive to be offended, really.
Oh, we won't put that in there. But we think it's funny. We like to listen to it. When you grew up, were the barns still by the house, the Drennan house?
No.
That was
They were gone,
They were gone.
in my recollection.
I'm trying to.
It just came into my mind, I'm thinking that my father worked on that house when they were painting it yellow.
The Drennan house.
Mhm. He painted some houses sometimes, and I have that in my mind. I'd have to ask my mother to be sure, but I think that might be true.
I thought it was white.
It is now, but it wasn't until a few years ago when Sprague had those aluminum clapboards put on it. It was yellow for years and years and years.
Yeah, in the book, I don't think I told you about this, but they refer to it as the Yellow Tavern.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
really wasn't the Yellow Tavern. The Yellow Tavern was a different building.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it was,
Yeah, you mentioned that.
that was because it was yellow at one point. Do you remember Mrs. Myers going to the Drennan's house and what her connection with the Drennans was?
She was a friend. It seems like there was some connection there, but I don't really know what it was. I never saw her at the Drennans. They did not encourage town people to come when they had guests. I never met them in there, only that first time. I did meet Mrs. Myers up at Sprague Bailey's mother's one day. I was up there visiting them. It was a cold day in the winter, and she asked me to come in, and she had her children sing a hymn before they went to bed every night, and I played for them. She took me back to the village. That has very little to do with Bressie Brennan.
Well, any more questions? Or
I can't think of anything.
do you want to add anything that we didn't ask?
I did once have an interesting experience there. I met John Latouche, the composer, that wrote Cabin in the Skies when I was there once.
And he was visiting?
He was visiting the Drennans. They came there. I think that they bought some of Bessie's paintings from time to time.
Well, they had a lot of connections with different people, didn't they? I mean, famous people and.
Well, they I know that they knew a lot of people from the music colony in Adamant, and they knew some of the Kents at Kent Corners. They knew the Myers. I'm really not sure of who else.
Was it 1952 that your painting was painted?
No, I would say that it might have been 54, maybe would sound right.
54.
What have they got on there? I don't think it was the right
It was
date.
52, and that's why I wondered if
They probably confused what I told them about meeting the Drennans with when I went to the, but you see, I went to the, when I wasn't attending the Gospel Hall in 1952, so that painting couldn't have been 1952. My guess would be that it was the summer of 54 that was painted.
I know you've already told me this before, but could you tell us again about the Gospel Hall and where the Gospel Hall was?
It was right where Vera Batchelder's garage is. It's the same building. That I'll show you sometime of the interior as it was when they used it for a church.
I knew you'd like to hear that. Okay.
East Callis to Hardwick in 1945 and 1946. I was about 9-10 years old.
That must have been amazing. So there must have been very few cars then.
Oh, there were cars. I mean, not like there are now, but a lot of people had cars.
They did. Huh.
And in the spring, sometimes out in Hardwick Gulf, they used to have teams to pull the cars up through the mud.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Of
during
course, the
mud
cars
season.
went through better than they do now. They were higher.
Yeah.
That's
Probably a
funny.
lot slower than they do now, too.
Yes.
God, they go through Woodbury. about
Yes, I
60.
told you that that road up by Gilbert's and Ann Baldwin's used to be the main road.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not
Before they
familiar
put
with
the
that.
blacktop
Mm-mm.
through.
Show that to you.
And down by Woodbury Lake, you know where Nanette Tavakian lives?
Yes, is that Haskell? Was she a Haskell? Yeah.
The old Haskell house. Just beyond there, the road, you can just about see where it went. Went way down by the brook, way down, it dipped way down deep.
Was it on the same side as her house?
Yes, the same side, and the same side as the road is now, only just as you get beyond her house, it went way down deep
No kidding.
and came back, and followed along and came back up.
By the Sabin place. The
No,
Sabin
but-
place would be the next place.
No, I'm
past.
talking going towards Woodbury.
Oh,
It went down at the foot of the hill by the cemetery
yeah. Yeah.
and came back out.
Yes. Yes, I know exactly where you're talking about.
And then it went out through where Elton Corey lives.
Yes, I'd heard
That
that,
was the main
too.
road.
Yep. I'd heard that because not too many years ago, Elton wanted it to be thrown up. The road to be thrown up because it was still considered a town road through his yard.
And the main road up on the East Hill, as I told you, I think when I talked with you before, that old house that's so derelict there, by Woodbury Lake, it went up there, where my grandmother used to live,
Yeah.
and up on the East Hill.
Was that really steep? Was that as steep as like the part is now when it went up over there?
Well, there was some hill, I can't remember, I never was up through there more than once or twice. You could just walk it when I remember.
Yeah.
But the old people, the wheelers, always called it the new road, the road that they use now.
New road.
And I told you too that road up by Woodbury Quarry ended right at the top of the hill
Yeah.
out of the village, and that road up by Parker's was up. Someone is looking something, I guess.
They're probably trying to figure out how to get into the radio station.
And the road up by Parker's was the main road. It connected way up at the top of the hill.
But
there.
it just ended at the top, and then what was there at the end of the road? Was somebody's house there, or was it just an...
It was farmland, I imagine.
Oh.
They put that road up through when the quarries opened.
Did the Drennans have, like, horses, or, like...
I suppose
like
they must have years ago.
And, like, I mean, do you think they had, like, a small farm? Like, do you think they had cows and chickens and...
I would imagine, probably, that they might have.
I think they did because Vera told me that they owned the land over in back of the school. The Drennans did, which was field then. So I think that they did farm somewhat, but I think that the hotel, like they mostly like kept, people that would stay at the hotel. They had like a livery stable type of thing in that big barn.
But it wasn't like for their, it wasn't part of, it was just sort of like an added thing. It wasn't like they had the farm for their survival, or like.
No.
Like they didn't produce like milk and sell it, or eggs or anything like that.
It didn't sound that way to me, but it sounded to me more like their father was a businessman that ran
That's
a
what I
hotel.
would think. They, you see, they grew up in the days of the quarry workers there. And Woodbury was a boom town at that time. There were all sorts of company houses. Those houses up on the flat were all company houses.
Yeah.
And there were people of many different nationalities that lived in Woodbury at that time, quarry workers. And it was a wild little place. I've heard them say that on a Saturday night, you'd see men lying beside the road drunk all the way up that It was, and the Drennans, I think that was a lot of his hotel business.
Yeah.
They had rooming houses and various things, but I think he kept quarry workers too. Probably transients that came through. But there wouldn't have been the tourists back then.
Yeah.
Wow. That's funny.
I wonder if they had like stills and stuff then. I mean,
Oh.
wasn't
I
They
have
must have.
heard, now, this is all that I can tell you about that.
we're not recording.
The Drennans, Mrs. Sabin down at Woodbury Lake, and the Drennans sort of competed for Woodbury society.
Oh.
And the Drennans came out way ahead.
Oh.
But Mrs. Sabin told me that the Drennans' father made liquor on the premises. A perfectly unscrupulous man, she said. Someone went blind drinking the liquor he made, and the Drennans said that Lizzie Sabin couldn't help it if she was a perfect fool.
It sounds like the Baldwin sisters on the Waltons making the recipe.
But I don't know that, you know what they did back then. That was long before my time. That hotel was long gone. The Drennan girls' parents were long gone before I remember anything about them.
My great grandmother, my grandmother grew up in New York, in the city in Queens, and my great grandmother had a store, and when she and my grandmother growing up, like I guess she was 20 when my great grandmother died, but growing up she helped out in the store. And then when my great grandmother died, my grandmother took over the store and kept the store, but it was during the time of Prohibition and she was bootlegging. So underneath the store she had like
Still.
Isn't that it's so crazy.
It was, there's a lot of that going on. My grandfather used to run whiskey. And
There was a lot of it up here because we were so near Canada.
yeah,
Oh
yeah. There's like all kinds of stories about people that used to do that, like for money, because make good money doing that. I imagine there wasn't much for work either during that time, and rationing. Wasn't that the same era that the rationing was?
No,
taking place?
rationing was World War II.
That was World War II,
Prohibition was back in the 20s.
20s.
I can remember rationing.
Did you now?
What was that like?
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, rationing was simply that you had to have books of tickets in order to be able to get meat, sugar. You were only allowed so much in a month's time. Coffee.
Wow.
What were the hardest things to get? The like coffee and sugar
Yes, and meat was very hard to get
and
too.
meat.
I know my mother said they got, of course, sometimes people raised their own, but we were living in Hardwick during a lot of that time. Mother said they got awfully tired of Spam because that was one of the meats you could get.
Oh yeah.
Cereal was hard to get. I can remember they're cooking rice with raisins and serving it for cereal in the morning.
Wow.
That's probably where cream of rice came from.
I really don't, I don't remember. Let's see, I was about 9 years old, I guess, at the end of World War II.
Wow.
Yeah, you were still really young.
I can remember buying Liberty stamps for defense in school every week
Wow.
when I was in first grade. The first Halloween entertainment I ever went to in South Woodbury was right in World War II, and the big girls sang "Coming In on a Wing and a Prayer."
Wow.
Well, I must.
Yep. Well, Dave, thank you so much.
Oh, you're entirely welcome.
This is great.